I had a unique experience on Wednesday. Ed Sullivan, if you know Ed in this church family as well, he had the same experience. We got to go out and watch someone else that we know from our church family, Lanny, go fly radio control airplanes. So maybe you've seen people fly the RC planes before. And not only did we get to watch him and a few other friends fly these planes, but we actually got to try it ourselves. And so Ed and I both had our turn at the controls. And there's a reason why this actually worked without things coming crashing into the ground. It's because we had somebody who was very experienced to follow. Lanny started flying these planes in 1975. He took a break for a couple decades somewhere between that time and now, but he has a lot of experience flying these planes and has several planes himself. We also had some very good input from some of the other people that are in this radio control airplane club. They're giving us pointers and telling us how to do things and showing us things with their own controls. Otherwise, if we had gone out there with a plane and some controllers ourselves, it would have resulted in absolute disaster. But since we had a good person to follow and to teach us, it didn't result that way. One thing Lanny told us, he said, I'm going to tell you what to do. It's going to work out. It's going to be fine. I'm going to take the plane off. I'm going to land the plane. I'll get it up in the air. I'll get it high enough to where if you make some mistakes, it's still recoverable. But he said, if I tell you to hand me the controls, hand me the controls. Don't wait. Hand it to me because I need it to do something. And there are a couple moments where we had to hand over the controls along the way. Like he would give us good instruction and we were doing fine and kind of flying these gradual loops around. But one time I got the plane a little bit too low and he said, hand me the controls. And so it needs a little more altitude, or maybe I handed it to him because I could tell it was getting low. But the idea was he needed to change things immediately. He needed the controls. There was another time when Ed was flying and the plane got a little bit far out of sight. You know, you need to be able to see these things. And it was just kind of, and Lanny said, give me the controls. And he brought it back in and then Ed was able to recover it. But that reminds me a lot of what we see today. We're looking at this theme this morning, following takes faith. We have to have faith in the one who knows more. And so when we look at Jesus and what he teaches, he gives us this instruction. And for the most part, he lets us kind of apply it and follow it in our lives. But then there's moments where he says, I'm taking control. And these things come into our life that we have no control over. But it's Jesus saying, I'm going to take you through this. Like, this is where we're going. This is what we're doing. I need control throughout all this. I need you not to have the control. And so we see that. But just like Lanny, he proved to be somebody who is, a good person to follow. Jesus is one, and we see even when he does take over the reins in our lives and we're out of control, but he's in control, it's still a good course. And we realize through it all, we can trust Jesus. He knows what he's talking about. We can apply the things he's instructing us in. And when he takes the reins, we can trust that he's going to land the plane ultimately in a good place. He's going to get us through, and he's got a purpose behind it. That's what we're looking at this morning is, again, following takes faith. And we're going to look at the lives of a few people that encounter Jesus or Jesus encounters, and Jesus invites them or they approach Jesus and say, hey, sign me up. I want to follow you. And then lastly, a situation that Jesus takes some of his followers into where they have no control at all over the situation, and it's to teach them something. But we're going to look at a few different things that require faith as we're following. And the first is the issue of comfort. Comfort. Sometimes following Jesus takes us out of our comfort zones and doesn't involve that. And it introduces this way. We're in Matthew chapter 8, continuing on where we left off last week, starting in verse 18. And this is what happens next. This is when Jesus saw large crowds around him. So he's surrounded by large crowds. What would you do if a large crowd suddenly started to gather around you? Most people would either run away or they would think, this is great. I'm on the stage now, and I get this. And I had an instance one time when I was on a missions trip in Africa, and we were speaking to a small school, 12 different kids who were probably junior high and high school age in a very rural community in Africa, in Uganda, Africa. So 12 people, I can handle 12 people, that's comfortable for me. But then there was an elementary school next door that in the middle of my time sharing with these kids got out. And so there were no longer 12 people, there were 20 people, and then there were 50 people, and then there were 100 people, and then there were 200, there were 300 kids and teachers that came out of this school. And I'm okay in front of people, But that was a little bit disconcerting because I was talking to 12 and all of a sudden people came in and it's like, what do you do? There's all these people. And for me, it was almost intimidating, right? And what's interesting with Jesus is sometimes, a lot of times there are crowds. And sometimes Jesus invites the crowds in and sometimes he embraces them. And other times he actually distances himself from the crowd. But Jesus is not pressured by the crowd. And sometimes we feel that pressure. Again, this issue of comforts. Following Jesus, a lot of times we want it to be comfortable, but it isn't always. Sometimes we get in situations where, there are people that we don't anticipate who want to hear, or we're put on the spot, or we get an immediate opportunity. But in the midst of all this, whether there's a couple or a handful of people or one person talking to Jesus, or if there's hundreds of people or thousands of people listening to Jesus, he doesn't let the size of the crowd or the people around him pressure him. He tries to follow God's Spirit, and he's prompted by God's Spirit. And you can see this different places throughout the New Testament, specifically where Jesus, the Holy Spirit, leads him out in the wilderness to be tested by the devil, by Satan, in different places. So Jesus is thinking, what is going to advance God's purposes as God in the flesh? What's going to advance these heavenly purposes, not necessarily at who's in front of him. And so he's not going to react to the crowd the same way all the time. In this particular situation, it says he gave the order to go to the other side of the sea. And you think, well, that's odd. And again, most of these stories take place around what's called the Sea of Galilee. So it's about, I think, 50 square miles or something like that is the size of this lake in northern Israel. So it's not a really huge body of water. Several miles, maybe 12 to 15 miles, across, and maybe a little bit more than that to the south. And so it's not a huge body of water, but most of these stories take place around this lake in northern Israel. And so there's this huge crowd. They're following Jesus, and you would think, great, another opportunity for Jesus. And he says, get in the boat, disciples. We're going to go away from them. You think, well, that's kind of odd. Like, isn't Jesus about embracing the crowds? Not necessarily in this situation. He has other plans, and he's being led by God's Spirit. And at this point in time, right as they're getting ready to get in the boat and go across the lake, it says in verse 19, a scribe approached him and said, "Teacher, I'll follow you wherever you go. So don't get in the boat yet. I want in on this journey." He's a scribe. A few details about scribes at this point in time. History seems to reveal that a lot of different synagogues, so maybe think each town in these Jewish communities throughout Israel, most synagogues have a scribe in residence. It would be like a secretary who would record what happens and what the teaching is about and what the discussions happen, and maybe does some planning with the local synagogues, the Jewish church service. Think of it that way. Also, scribes were used in different situations, maybe with the city governments to record things. They were also used in the Sanhedrin, which was like the Supreme Court of Israel at the time. And so making all these different decisions and judgments, they would record things. And the scribes were people who, they spent a lot of time in the scriptures. Most Jewish men would have their own copy of at least the Torah, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy in your current Bibles. And so, and these copies traditionally were handwritten. But they wouldn't let just anyone make these copies. They would employ scribes. And so scribes are going through, especially the first part of the Old Testament, a lot, making everybody's authentic copies of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, for them to personally have in their possession. They also would examine more difficult questions. So if you had a question, a theological question, you'd come to a scribe because they spend so much time copying and studying the Old Testament scriptures. They're the ones that are going to have the best shot at giving you an answer. And so they would make decisions and make practical applications. And when you see different laws or different traditions that the Jews would follow, in addition to things that you would just read verbatim in the Old Testament, a lot of times it's because the scribe had said, here's the best way for us to live this out practically. Kind of like what you get when you listen to a sermon in our day and age. Here's some scripture, here's some truth, but here's some practical application. And maybe for them, here's some other traditions or specific ways that you should apply this in our culture, in our context. So that's a little bit of information about who the scribes were. So this man was very educated in the Old Testament scriptures. And he approaches Jesus and says, "I'll follow you wherever you go." And you would think Jesus is going to say, "Great, get in the boat, right? Join us. Here we go." And interestingly, his response is a little bit different. I think the reason why is because he professes his willingness to go anywhere at the height of Jesus' popularity. Jesus, he's just given this sermon with thousands of people. Everybody's approaching him. People are grabbing onto his robe, trying to get healed from it. Power from God is coming out, even of his clothing and healing people. And he is the man. It would be similar to you going up to somebody who is maybe whatever party you prefer, their nomination for president in the upcoming election, right? You could see if you jump in with this person, it's going to take you great places, right? If this person wins, you're going to have an inroad. You might have these different positions in government or at least, a friend in high places. So why wouldn't you want to join yourself to somebody like that? And I think that's kind of what's going on in this scribe's head. He's like, Jesus, he could be this Messiah, this promised Savior figure. He could be the one who's going to finally turn over the government of Rome and bring control back to Israel, and I'm on board with that. He's a new leader. This is going to be great. What could go wrong? And Jesus' response in verse 20, it says he told him, foxes have dens and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man, the Son of Humanity, has no place to lay his head at night. Can you imagine again? You go up to this presidential nominee for your party and you say, I want to get on board with that. And they tell you, you can join me, but you might not have any place to sleep at night. Kind of takes it down a few notches, doesn't it? It doesn't seem as appealing. Well, why wouldn't that be the case? Because Jesus, he's not a political candidate. He's God in the flesh. And the way that he operates is going to be very different than what we perceive it. If we think we're going to jump on the Jesus train so everybody's going to love us and life is going to be grand and popular, we are probably in for a little bit of a rude awakening. Jesus says this, I don't have a place to sleep at night some nights, because he wants to caution him not to expect prosperity or predictability. He's saying, if you're following me because you think, I'm going to take you to great places and it's going to be this life of ease and maybe I'm your way to step into power or positions or ease, popularity, like you've got the wrong idea. Because you follow me and life's not going to be predictable. Because as we know, sometimes Jesus rode, and that's what the word follow, it's a picture of in the Greek language this was written in. It's a picture of joining somebody on the same road. You're going to walk down the same road together. And so Jesus is saying, if you jump on the road with me, you might end up with pain. Had a conversation with a friend this last week who's dealing with a lot of pain in his life. And I know some of you, and even some of you who are watching the service from home right now, the reason why you are is because you're dealing with a lot of pain right now. And physically, you can't even make it here, and you can't control it. And sometimes Jesus' road takes us to those places. Sometimes it takes us into poverty, where we don't have a place to lay our head, or where we can't afford rent, or where food or other resources are not plentiful, or to even other cultures and other places where we give up a lot of what we experience here. And then sometimes it takes us to persecution, where people criticize us, or they don't understand us, or they divide ways with us, we lose friendships over it, and so it's not always this really pleasant road. And Jesus wanted him to be acquainted. But Jesus at the same time didn't say, no, you can't follow me. He said, just so you know. And what's also intriguing is we don't know how this man responded. We don't know if he jumped on board with Jesus or if he walked away. It doesn't tell us that. And I think maybe the reason why Matthew doesn't tell us how this man responded, and in the rest of the stories, we don't know how these people responded either, is because it's not really about how those people responded. It's about how are you going to respond and how am I going to respond? Are we going to let comfort drive us? Will we have faith? Because following, it takes faith. Are we going to have faith even if comfort is not a part of the promise we get from Jesus? And that's up to us. It's in our court. Not only was there this issue of comfort, but there were some other people that had concerns, you might say priorities in their lives. Things that they placed first. Like, I'll follow you, Jesus, but I've got this other thing that's kind of really important that I want to focus on right now. So maybe in a minute, I'll get on board with you. In verse 21, it says, Lord, another of his disciples said, first, let me go and bury my father. First, let me go and bury my father. Seems like a pretty reasonable request, right? In Luke 9:59, we see Luke's account of the same situation. We get a little bit more information from Luke. He says, Jesus actually asked this person, follow me. So Jesus approaches and he initiates and he talks to this person and says, follow me. And the person responds, first, let me go bury my father. I want to take us into first century Jewish burial practices for a second. This should be a fun little ride, just so you know the context, and I think maybe it gives us more information on what's happening here. So Jewish burials were typically very fast, maybe before the sun went down, at least within 24 hours. So the person, once they were deceased, their eyes would be closed, their body would be washed and wrapped and bound in strips of cloth, sometimes with perfumes or spices. And then they'd be placed on a stretcher, essentially, and kind of carried through the community to the place of burial. Lots of times it was a family tomb. And they'd be placed inside by the immediate family members. The friends and neighbors would join this procession. There was mourning. A lot of times they would hire people, especially women, to come and cry and mourn publicly as they would parade out to the tomb. There were benches a lot of times around these tombs for people to grieve and to mourn and to have sort of a quick funeral service, or perhaps remember this person's life and have some conversation and sit there. And then for the next 7 days, the family would go back to the home. The family really didn't leave the home unless they were going back to the tomb to weep or to mourn again, and then they go back and forth. This is why when Lazarus dies in John chapter 11, they presume that Mary's gone out to the tomb. It was customary, you either stay at home or you go to the tomb. And for anybody except for your father or mother, that was the way things went. 7 days of pretty intense mourning, but after 7 days were up, life started to gradually get back to normal. But things were very different for a father or a mother. And this fits in here because this man said, first, let me go and bury my father. Let's talk for a moment about how things were a little bit different with a father or mother. Some Jewish documents from the 3rd century or so AD, called the Talmud, talk about some of these traditions that were followed then and in the previous years before. And here are a few things that were different about mourning a parent. It says in the Talmud, when mourning for all others, siblings, spouse, children, you can cut or shave your hair after 30 days have gone by. When you mourn for your parents, you can't do so until your friends start to scold you about your appearance. So you can't shave or cut your hair until people are like, man, you look disheveled. What happened to you? Oh, you're grieving your parents. You probably should cut your hair now. It's been 2 or 3 months or 4 or 5 months. It's okay. Secondly, when mourning for all others, he may attend a celebration after 30 days have passed. When mourning for a mother or father, not until 12 months have passed. So no weddings, no parties, no celebrations for a whole year with mom or dad. Everybody else, 30 days, and you can start celebrating again. Third, when mourning for all others, he rends his garment a handbreadth. So as they were mourning, the Jews would tear their robe. They would tear it about the width of a hand across. But when you were mourning a father or mother, you would tear your garment until your heart was visible, so your chest where your heart was, because again, it was like your heart was being torn. Lastly, it says, when mourning for all others, when mourning for all others, basically, again, 7 days. When mourning for a parent, 11 months or so, you could never fully repair the rip in your garment if you were mourning a father or mother as well. And so there were some different restrictions. It was a little bit deeper. And then at the end of those 12 months, what they would do is they would go back to the family tomb for a father or mother, for other relatives as well, a year later. But by that time, all that was remaining of the corpse were bones. And so they would either have an ossuary, a limestone bone box that was just large enough to fit those bones into, and they would place the bones in that, put it on a shelf in the tomb, or they would have a separate compartment and they would place the bones there, and after a few different family members had died or passed away, they would kind of seal across that area, that shelf, with those bones. And so that was like a second burial. And a lot of times, or at least people who are familiar with the archaeology and the kind of the process of this burial, think that probably what this man was asking for, now some scholars would differ. Some people would say this man was asking to remain at home until he could receive an inheritance, which is a possibility, until his father died, because maybe his father was getting up there in years and he wanted to spend the last few months or years with his dad and be there to receive the family inheritance. Maybe that's why. But a lot of people who look at these burial customs believe that the reason why this man wanted to go bury his father, it wasn't the first burial. It was this second burial that would happen 12 months later, where they would take the deceased bones and put them in this ossuary container or put them on a shelf. And that was the end of the mourning, right? Because it lasted 12 months. And so this man possibly, I would say probably, given light of these burial customs, wasn't saying, let me stick around home till my dad passes away. He was saying, let me stick around until we can do that second burial. Let me have 12 months to mourn my father's passing, and then let me go with my family members and rebury the bones 12 months later, is why he said, let me stay at home to bury my father. Probably. Again, some options, but that's something that I want to throw in there. Verse 22 is Jesus' response. It says, but Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Again, it sounds kind of harsh, right? You can't go and be a part of your father's funeral. Let the dead bury their own dead. Jesus is being harsh, but he's not being harsh, I don't think. I think, again, he's probably speaking into that custom of waiting 12 months and then just being there for that memorial service to finally put the bones at rest. And I think what Jesus is doing, I think he's urging him to weigh the importance of announcing God's kingdom and jumping on board as a follower of him against just staying put and reflecting on a life, albeit a father, but a life that's already passed, and waiting on this second burial months down the road. That's something that other people in the family could just as easily be a part of. In Luke's account of this same scenario in chapter 9, verse 60, he says, let the dead bury their own dead, but then he says, but you go and spread the news of the kingdom of God. And so he's saying there's something that's a little bit more important that you can be involved in, and that's sharing this news of God's kingdom and this news of this king. Not everybody can do that because not everybody even believes that. Not everyone believed that Jesus was the coming king. Not everyone believed that God's kingdom was now within reach, but this man did. And Jesus said, you have an opportunity to do that. He says, let the dead bury their own dead. Dead people don't normally bury other people, correct? I mean, last time I checked. So I think that Jesus is talking about death from a spiritual standpoint. I think he might be talking about the family members who don't believe that God's kingdom is near and Jesus is this coming king. Those family members, I think he's saying, why don't you let those family members stick around to bury your father's bones in 12 months? But for you, you do believe in me and you have this opportunity and it's not going to be here forever. And so what's going to be most important to you? And again, we don't know how this man responds, right? It doesn't tell us. And I think the reason why is because, what would you do if you were in a similar situation? What's going to be more important to you? The final scenario that I want to mention in this situation is not actually in Matthew's gospel. Luke gives a third person that Jesus has a conversation with about following, and Matthew doesn't include it, but I think it's valuable for us. So I'm going to just kind of take a rabbit trail there for just a moment. This is Luke chapter 9, verses 61 and 62. It says, another also says, so the third person, I will follow you, Lord, but first. There's that word again, first. So he's got a concern that's greater than Jesus at this point in time. First, let me go and say goodbye to those at my house. Again, another reasonable request, right? I'll follow you, but let me go say goodbye to everybody in the house first. And Jesus says, nobody who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Again, it sounds a little harsh, a little straightforward. So what's really, really happening here? I think that this guy has good intentions, but the real reason why he wants to say goodbye is because he's a little bit indecisive. I think in his mind what's happening is he's saying, let me go back and say goodbye to my family, and at the same time I'll figure out whether I'm really willing to put Jesus and this ministry above just spending time with my family, because I really like my family. Again, not that family's bad, but this man's wrestling, I think, with indecision over what's the higher priority. And I think Jesus is actually illustrating with this illustration of putting your hand to the plow and looking back. I think one thing Jesus is trying to point out is this man's reluctance to shift his focus from his family to following Jesus. Like, it's okay to have elements of both, but where's your focus going to be? Because there may be points in time where following Jesus and following your family aren't going to take you to the same place. Think about it this way. Again, he uses this illustration of a plow. Most of us haven't used a plow recently. A lot of us have driven a car recently. So when you're operating a plow and you're looking backwards, the problem with that is that you can't determine what straight is in your rows. Think about driving a car forward while looking either in your rearview mirror or with your head reversed. So you're driving. Can you imagine what would happen to you driving down the road like this? or with all your focus on the rearview mirror. You're seeing what's happening behind you, so you can kind of tell what's happening with your vehicle, but you really can't tell where you're headed. It's the same kind of thing when you're working with a plow. Looking back while you're plowing is ineffective. And I think Jesus is trying to say, if you're focused more, on your family, what your family thinks, them as a priority above me, it's going to be really ineffective at accomplishing what I need you to accomplish for my kingdom. At the same time, if he focuses on Jesus and his kingdom, I don't think that his family gets left out. I think that his relationship with his family probably would be improving and his family would be incorporated into that. But Jesus is again trying to question, where is your focus? Where is your attention? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said this: nobody can be a slave of two masters, right? And he used an example, God and money. It's kind of the same thing, only I think in this story, Jesus would say God and family. Only one person ultimately can determine things. You can only really follow one. So you're going to follow God or you're going to follow your family. Again, not that one says you won't have anything to do with your family, but there may be some things where God's direction for you, your family's desires are different. For example, when I first moved to Utah 20 years ago, I had a conversation with my mom, and she said, we're pretty confident you'll be back here in the Midwest within 2 years. I said, okay, that's fair. 20 years later, I'm here. Why am I here? I'm here because ultimately I've been following, hopefully, what God's direction and plan is for my life, not just my family's desires. Because if I gave in to my family's desires, I would have moved back, within months, if not a couple of years, to please them. And so there comes this point where you have to figure out, who are you going to follow? And it takes faith because we're concerned about these other priorities, our family or our focus. Also in here, I think Jesus might be using some images that connect us back to the Old Testament. One of the things that the Jews often did is they would repeat words and phrases that appear other places in Scripture. And this idea of putting your hand to the plow, the Bible actually doesn't talk about plows all that often, surprisingly. One of the places it does is with the story of Elisha. Elisha is a prophet in the Old Testament, and Elijah, just before he is, according to the Old Testament, taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, so pretty interesting story, chooses a replacement for him here on earth, and it's Elisha. And he encounters Elisha out plowing a field with some oxen. And Elisha actually, when Elijah approaches him, says, can I first say goodbye to my parents first, just like happens here? And you know what Elijah's response is? It's sure, go ahead, say goodbye. Like, how could I deny you that? That's why I think that this man's looking for a little more than a quick goodbye for his family. Because Elijah in the Old Testament says, yeah, I can't ask. I'm asking so much of you. At least go tell your mom and dad goodbye. And then after he does that, he takes his oxen that he's been plowing with and offers them as a sacrifice, a burnt offering by fire. And then the wood that he uses is the plow chopped up. And he's making a statement like, I'm going to follow what God has for me in this new calling, not just my devotion to being a farmer for the rest of my life. And it's a point of separation. And yet I don't think that's what this man is willing to do that Jesus is talking to about the idea of following him. He's not quite willing to separate. The other thing is not just that phrase, but looking back. A story that uses that phrase, looking back, is actually with Lot's wife. And so in Genesis, some angels come to Lot and his family and say, flee the city of Sodom. God's judgment is going to fall in the city. And yet at the same time, as they're fleeing, as they're running away, Lot's wife, she looks back. And the reason why she looks back is because she has a little bit of a longing for what's in the past. She doesn't want to let go. And the term that's used for look back in the Gospel of Matthew has a similar nuance to it. It's this idea that you're looking back, but you're looking back with a longing, with a preference for what you had in the rear view. You don't really want to separate from that. And so I think this man, he looks and he says, I love my family a little bit too much to follow you, Jesus, more than them. And it's really impossible to be devoted if our allegiance is divided. You can only serve one master, ultimately. So how would you respond if you have other priorities? I think the question's up to us. Final thing I want to share is about a story. It's not people that approach Jesus about following. It's where Jesus grabs the controls, like Lanny did from us a couple of times this past Wednesday. And he says, I'm taking you into this. I'm doing the steering, so just hold on for the ride. So he's had these conversations. We don't really know how the people respond ultimately. And then he gets in the boat because he doesn't want to engage the crowd at this point in time, and his disciples follow him. So again, Jesus is interested in forming disciples, not necessarily accumulating fans. If he was interested in the fan base, he would have stayed there and engaged the crowd. But he has a bigger purpose, and that's forming these disciples, these pupils who are going to imitate his life. That's the idea behind it. He's going to get more personal with people, not necessarily more popular with people. So he gets his disciples into the boat, and it says, suddenly a violent storm, a shaking storm arose on the Sea of Galilee, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. So waves are covering the boat is what's happening. And then it says, but he, Jesus, was sleeping. So Jesus, we know from other places in the Gospels, he's on a little cushion in the back of the boat. He's sleeping, and waves are crashing over the boat, covering it. I hope you can see the irony of this and put yourself in this moment, because I think if it wasn't so crazy and frantic, it would be laughable that this is happening. Just a couple notes about the Sea of Galilee. It's not very common for storms to happen on the Sea of Galilee, but the geography of it can produce some very sudden, very fierce storms because it's 680 feet below sea level. So the air is warm over the sea and moist, and cool air can come off of the surrounding mountains and just kind of land on the middle of the sea. So every once in a while, there are fierce storms. Here's an example. You can see this wave here. It looks kind of like an ocean wave crashing in, but this is a lake. This is the Sea of Galilee. This is a storm that happened in 1992. And it was one of the fiercest storms it's the only one that we actually have video footage of this magnitude. Because again, normally the Sea of Galilee is pretty calm, pretty flat, but it wasn't then. You can go to the next slide. So this is another place, just a kind of an outlook and overlook of the sea. And you can see how choppy, again, this is a lake, not that large of a lake. And this is the storm condition. Then one last slide. So this is a staircase, and you can see, if it was a video, you'd see the waves coming up and crashing over the staircase, but it's a wave amplitude or height. So it's 10 feet here in this picture from the bottom of the wave to the top of the wave. And if you're in a small fishing boat out on this lake and there are 10-foot waves that are coming over your boat, and this is something that we've seen, within our lifetimes, something like that, I think, is not only possible, but it's what they were experiencing at this point in time. These storms happen very suddenly. They're hard to predict. They're very rare, but they do happen. And I think that's what Jesus takes them into the boat, knowing, I think, what's ahead. So that's what they're in for. People who are familiar with Galilee, they're fearful they're going to die. Okay, several of Jesus' disciples, they're fishermen. Almost all of Jesus' disciples, they grew up around this lake. They haven't seen anything like this. They've seen storms, but this is a whole different level. And they are fearful. These fishermen who spend their life on this lake, they're like, we're going to die. And that's the situation. And Jesus is in the boat, and it's a good thing he is, because eventually they go to Jesus and they wake him up and they tell him, we're going to die. Can you imagine the story if Jesus wasn't in the boat? What are you going to do? Just scream like, ah, and then it's over with, right? You've just never seen this. What I think, and this is something that I discovered this last week, and I think it's something to definitely take a close look at here. Jesus' statement, the next thing he says, it says, so the disciples came and woke him up, because Jesus, he's the miracle guy here. And so they say, Lord, save us, we're going to die. And he says to them in response in verse 26, why are you fearful? And I want to point something out here because it doesn't come through in the translation. I think for a lot of us, we look at this and go, well, Jesus, you know why I'm fearful. There's 10-foot waves swamping our boat. We're going to drown. And what Jesus is not saying is it's bad to be afraid. Because we read this in our English translations and we think Jesus is saying you just shouldn't be afraid of anything, right? Just buck it up and deal with it. Jesus is not telling us that. There are a lot of terrifying situations that we experience in life. And being terrified and feeling emotionally afraid and overwhelmed, I think that's perfectly fine. Jesus wasn't addressing that. The term that Jesus uses here, it's not don't be afraid. There's another word for that. It's phobos, it's fear, it's terror. But he uses a specific word, only 3 other places in the New Testament, for timid. He's not saying don't be afraid or don't be terrified. He's saying don't be timid. Don't be timid. And the point, I think, here is something totally different. The problem isn't them being terrified. The problem is them being timid. It's not unspiritual to feel afraid, but if our response to being afraid is to be timid, to shrink back for an opportunity, to be shy, that's what Jesus is cautioning them against doing. He says, why are you timid? You have little faith. What I have in your notes next, God allows hardships and hopeless situations, because that's what this is. This is hopeless. How are you going to get through this one? I think so that our faith can shine and reveal the one in whom we're trusting in. So they have an opportunity here, and the opportunity is either to have faith in Jesus. I know he's brought me to this place, and it seems hopeless, but I'm going to trust that somehow, for some reason, Jesus has a purpose in this. We mentioned several people in our church who have cancer right now. That's one of the most hopeless situations I can think of. At least we have some options for treatments and surgeries and things of that nature. But when you're in a situation where your life is on the line, sometimes it feels extremely hopeless, and you can't do anything in your power to control it or to make sure that you get the outcome that you want out of these situations. But in those moments, it's really opportunity, the best opportunity for our faith to shine. Because we say, God, I know that you brought me to this situation. I know that you have a reason behind it. Here's the controls. Take over. I'm going to trust you to navigate me through this. And I'm going to trust that you have a purpose behind it. And that's a difference, because timidity is saying, God, I'm going to shy away from this opportunity to exercise faith. I'm just going to let the circumstance overwhelm me. And faith is the opposite of that, where you are being courageous and you're saying, I don't understand why, I don't understand how God's going to do this, but I believe, I trust in him that he has a reason for it and that he's going to bring me through this situation. And that, I think, is the difference. When we're timid and we doubt God's goodness, we lose out on an opportunity. We kind of miss the point, which is for us to exercise our faith. Because following takes faith. But again, faith, it isn't always easy, and it's not actually our first inclination a lot of the time. And we do see that God can fix any kind of situation. In fact, the way Jesus responds, it says he got up and rebuked the wind and the sea, and there was a great calm. And so Jesus can fix it. And whatever situation you're in that you're out of control of and that's hopeless to you, God could in a moment fix it. He could. But if he doesn't fix it, he's got a purpose for it. Not only a purpose, he loves you. And he's got a way to benefit you by bringing you through that, and a way to allow your faith to shine to the people, other people in your life who will see you walk through this. So God could fix it, but he might just want your faith to shine, because he might have a bigger purpose in all of that, to show his presence and to show his power. And again, in this situation, his purpose was to reveal in a greater way who he was, because people respond, what kind of man is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him. Who is this? And maybe people will say the same thing about you, whether God fixes your situation or whether God lets you go through it. Who is this person that they would believe in even when life gets this hopeless? Who is this? Why would you ever have faith in someone who would bring you through and into a situation like this? Who is the object of their faith? So I think those are all challenging things for us to interact with. But it does take faith. There's an element of faith whenever following Jesus is involved. So here's a few options as we kind of conclude things this morning. A few things to think about. One, what is holding you back from following Jesus now? Maybe it's a desire to have a predictable life or prosperity. Jesus doesn't promise that. Maybe it is the sadness of a loss that you can't replace, like this man who lost his father and is still grieving months later, perhaps. Maybe it's a responsibility that other people could carry out. And again, his family perhaps could have done this secondary burial if he would have taken time to join Jesus and talk about his kingdom with other people. Or maybe it's a stronger attachment to something or somebody else besides Jesus, which was the person who said, ultimately, it's about what my family wants. I can't say, Jesus, it's about what you want, because I just care too much about what they want. Secondly, how we respond to Jesus' invitation to follow him, because we don't know how these people responded. And I think the point is, how are we going to respond? Because he wants us to follow him as well. If he were here, he would invite you. Thirdly, what hardship or hopeless situation are you currently facing? Some of you are, because I know the details. Has your tendency been to be timid and doubt God's goodness, or to trust and point other people to your source of hope? And your source of hope is a God who can fix any situation. He loves you, and he embodies and advances everything that's good. But he may not fix the situation, but he still has good, kind intentions and reasons for it. So just some possible ways to apply what we're learning today. Let's pray together and we'll close. God, I thank you again for this time to take a look at some different people who were faced with the choice to follow you. And again, I think that choice is placed before all of us. And some of us, it's just hard to let go. There are some other things that are priorities or other things that are a little bit easier to trust in or that feel a little more stable, a little more predictable, so we don't want to let go. And I pray, if that's the case, that you'll show us more and more of who you are. And there'll come a point where we are willing to let go and put the controls in your hands and see that you have the best plan for us and the most abundant life available for us. I also pray if we're in the middle of these stormy seas that came out of nowhere and caught us by surprise right now, one, that we wouldn't forget that you're in the boat with us, but two, even if you don't completely calm the storm and fix the situation, that you give us the faith and the trust in you, not to be timid, but to be strong in our faith. And that's how we're not timid, is just by trusting. To trust you through this and to point out you and your goodness to other people who will watch us walk through this, so they can be amazed and they can question who it is in whom we trust. I ask that today in Jesus' name. Amen.